Hey, it's Edward Stevens. You know me. Remember me? Remember all those good times we shared when you used to be on Facebook and it would just be you and I just having a heart-to-heart conversation, probably about real estate? Well, we're going to dive into something that's very, very important, something that's very overlooked in today's marketplace. You know, as fast as homes are selling, it's very easy to get sloppy. It's very easy for real estate agents to just be cranking in the transactions and cranking out the commissions, not worried about really any of the details. And so I've noticed it. Agents are getting sloppy, sellers are getting sloppy, buyers are doing anything they can do, writing anything they can write into a contract in order to get it accepted. It's like Royal Rumble. Now, if you had a weird childhood in the 1990s, you probably remember watching a lot of professional wrestling. Now, I think there's still professional wrestling around today, but it's kind of a niche thing and it's not really something people talk about in more elevated social circles. But back in the day, professional wrestling was a thing. You know, you had The Rock, you had Stone Cold Steve Austin. You had them all. And they would have a Royal Rumble from time to time. All the superstars would get in the ring and something would happen, okay? And that's how a lot of transactions are happening, is there's a Royal Rumble, and rather than fighting for a belt, they're fighting for a contract that's signed by the seller, okay? That's a fairly accurate estimate of the Kansas City real estate market right now. Before we dive into this any further, I want to take a moment to just thank everybody here, everybody who supported this. Now, this facial hair, not so much this, but this up, down here. It's been a good ride. I appreciate everybody's, hanging in there with me, trying to pretend with me that it's a beard, that it's facial hair, that it's acceptable, that it's okay to wear it in public. But we've all kind of collectively said no. And as of 8 a.m. tomorrow, Monday morning, the bottom half of what was to be my beard or facial hair will be gone. And I feel like this is a decision that I didn't make lightly. I had to make it with thinking about my teammates, and I had to think about the professionalism of my brand and of Reese Nichols Brokerage. And so we've decided, we took a vote and it's going away. Now, back to your regularly scheduled programming. The most devastating thing that could happen when buying a home. Do you know what it is? Certainly there are a lot of nightmare scenarios out there. But one thing that's often overlooked is the situation where you're buying a home from a seller and there is a tenant living in the home. So imagine you're going to look at homes, you found the perfect home, you notice that it's occupied by somebody, maybe in the seller's disclosure or somewhere on the MLS, it says tenant occupied. Well, normally, if that happens, if you're not trying to buy investment property, which is probably, the majority of you watching, if you're not interested in buying investment property, you don't want that tenant in there. When you close, you want them out. So I want to give you some tips on what you can do to ensure not only that they are out, but that they are not going to become a liability for you after closing. The first thing you're going to want to do is, obviously, when you're writing the offer, either you, if you're representing yourself, or have your real estate agent that's a buyer's agent, if they're the one representing you, have that discussion with the listing agent or the seller up front about what is to be done with the tenant. Okay, ideally, you can put whatever decision you guys render into the initial offer. It'll just make things a lot cleaner. James Ziller, cut that tenant off. So I want to cut the tenant off. We're going to talk about how to cut the tenant off. Okay. This is the most important thing though. After you go under contract, that's a fully executed contract, you and the seller, you have a due diligence period. Now, normally, if there's no tenant involved, you're checking out the insurability, you're checking out the structure itself, you're probably checking out the homeowners association regulations, maybe city restrictions, regulations, taxation, all of those things. You're verifying what the seller's disclosure said, making sure that that's true. With the tenant occupying the home, there's another layer of complexity though. So you want to investigate that tenant. The best course of action would be to get a copy of the lease that is signed between the tenant and the seller. You want to be able to review that lease. That's number one. And you might say, well, why is that any of your business? Well, I'm going to tell you in a moment. Because the seller might say, hey, it's none of your business what I charge them for rent. It's none of your business what the tenant's name is. It's not any of the tenants, but your business with how long the tenants live there. Okay. All right. Ask for it. But more importantly, when you're requesting that, I want you to also request that the seller and the tenant fill out an estoppel. It's not really discussed very much in residential real estate brokers terminology. What is an estoppel? It's a fancy word for saying, hey, this is a document that discusses what has been agreed upon between the seller and the tenant. Let's say, for example, you didn't check the lease. You didn't ask for an estoppel. No estoppel was filled out. You did your normal inspections. You went to the title company and you closed in 30 days. And you got the keys and you're driving over to your new house, and then you notice the tenant is still living there. And you said, hey, I put in the contract that the tenant was supposed to move out. How did that happen? The tenant, and you knock on the door and you go, hey, I own this house now. Guess what? Guess what? The tenant doesn't have to leave. What if I told you the tenant didn't have to leave? What if I told you that the house you just bought is being occupied legally by somebody else? Right? Because that could happen. That could happen. That could totally happen. You knock on the door, the tenant answers and says, oh, I've still got 3 weeks on my lease left. What are you talking about? You don't want to be in that situation. The government that will not side with you, probably. The tenant rights in this country are strong. They will more than likely side with whoever is currently living in the home. So think about that. Now, that is a scenario you want to avoid. Let's think of another scenario. Let's say you drive over to your new home. You didn't do any estoppel. You didn't read any lease. And you drive over to your new home and you find out that it's totally vacant. You start moving stuff in. You invite your friends over for dinner that night. It's a big celebration. You wake up the next morning and the tenant pulls into the driveway. And you go, well, that's interesting. They probably just forgot something. And you answer the door and they say, hey, what are you doing in the home that we have for rent? And you say, well, it's vacant and I bought it and I live here now. And they'll say, oh, no, we still have a lease in place. No, we moved our stuff out, but we still have time on our lease. We still technically occupy this home. Yeah, we moved our stuff out, but we still occupy this home technically. We still have a lease in place. That's bad news for you. That's really bad news for you. Okay? Here's another scenario. Let's say that same situation, they show up. They say, home was vacant, you moved in, they knock on your door, and rather than saying they still occupy the home, let's say they said this instead, knock, knock, hey, I'm here to collect my security deposit. The previous owner said that you would have my security deposit. It's $1,500, and I left the place sparkling clean, and he said that you would pay me $1,500. And On top of that, since we cut my lease short, I had prepaid 2 months of rent, and you owe me that back too. So like all told, it's gonna be like $5,000, and he just told me that I could pick it up from you. And you're going, excuse me? What are you talking about? See, that's the nightmare scenario you want to avoid. And I think the way that you use a real estate agent is like the way you use a minesweeper when you're in war. You know there are mines in the minefield. You know that you can walk into this real estate game and come out clean on the other side. You've probably had an aunt or an uncle or a friend at work, or some coworker, friend, or somebody at a bar that you met that was just so lucky. They didn't need no real estate agent. They didn't need nothing. They made it all, they made all the money in the world. They saved all those commissions. Well, you know what? There's people who don't look both ways before walking across the street, and they survive. Now, does that mean that you should walk across the street without looking both ways? Right? Does that mean if you know that there's a minefield ahead, that you should just take your chances? Or do you think you should pull out the minesweeper and find out where the mines are so that you don't step on one and explode? Okay? A good real estate agent is a good minesweeper. And with the lease, with the tenant, with that whole situation, you need somebody who's very attuned to safeguarding you, the buyer, okay? Because if you don't have that person, or if you have the wrong person, you could be left high and dry when you most need it, when you are most financially susceptible to damage. And just like we said, it could be the worst case scenario when buying a home. Think about it. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to say you gotta get protected. Okay? Edward Stevens here with the Stevens Group at Reese Nichols. And I look forward to seeing you someday very soon at the closing table. Talk to you later.